The gown is gorgeous.
Thank you. I saw it in the window and I just couldn't resist it.
That's the greatest compliment I think I can get.
Carol Burnett is one of the most beloved figures in television history, a comedy legend who built her career on laughter, kindness, and grace. But behind the scenes of The Carol Burnett Show, not everything was as joyful as it looked. This is the side of Carol Burnett few people know about. Join us as we uncover the real story of what happened behind the curtain. Harvey Korman. In the 1970s, The Carol Burnett Show was more than just a hit. It was a cultural touchstone. Every Saturday night, families across America gathered around their television sets to watch Carol Burnett and her team turn ordinary moments into unforgettable comedy. The show was warm, funny, and filled with heart. It was the kind of program that made people feel good after a long week, and it became a symbol of television's golden age. At the center of it all was Carol herself, gracious, down-to-earth, and fearless in her humor. She could sing, dance, and make people laugh without ever needing to be cruel. She represented kindness mixed with talent, and America adored her for it. Standing beside her, episode after episode, was Harvey Korman. He was her partner in comedy, the other half of some of the show's most memorable sketches. Together, their timing was perfect. Carol's energy met Korman's sharp wit like a match made for live television. Viewers saw a bond so natural that many believed they must be as close off-screen as they were on it. Their sketches became classics, like The Dentist with Tim Conway, or the endless parodies that turned ordinary situations into unforgettable comedy. But behind the laughter, small tensions began to grow. Tensions that even the biggest fans never saw. According to those who worked behind the scenes, the atmosphere began to change around the middle of the show's run. Costume designer Bob Mackie, who dressed the entire cast in some of television's most creative costumes, later shared that Harvey Korman started acting differently. He became more irritable, easily frustrated, and sometimes distant from the rest of the team. The man who used to laugh along with Carol's jokes during breaks now preferred to keep to himself. Some days he barely spoke to her between takes. Crew members noticed it but didn't dare comment. The energy backstage felt heavier, even when the audience was still roaring with laughter out front. Mackie remembered that Korman's attitude seemed to shift once the show reached its peak success. The Carol Burnett Show had already won several Emmys and was one of the top-rated programs on CBS. The pressure was higher than ever, and so were expectations. Some people close to the show quietly believed Korman was feeling overshadowed by Carol's growing fame. While he was loved and respected, it was Carol's name in the title, her face on the magazine covers, and her voice that audiences instantly recognized. It wasn't that he lacked talent. Harvey Korman was one of the best character comedians of his time, but ego and pride often follow success. And in an environment where laughter paid the bills, even small insecurities could grow into something bigger. Carol Burnett, by contrast, ran her show with a kind of calm authority. She was the leader, whether she claimed the title or not. Everyone, including Harvey, knew it. Yet that same balance of power also meant that when things began to crack between them, there was no easy way to hide it. Harvey's mood swings and Carol's attempts to keep the peace created a quiet divide that people could feel, even if it wasn't openly discussed. By 1974, the tension had built to the point where it could no longer be ignored. The show was still winning awards and breaking viewership records, but the air between its two biggest stars had changed. The laughter still came, but behind it was a growing strain, a mix of exhaustion, pride, and unspoken resentment. That uneasy feeling would soon come to a breaking point, one that the entire studio would remember for years to come. What happened next at Studio 33 would shock everyone and nearly end one of television's most beloved partnerships. Petula Clark. It was a warm afternoon at CBS's Studio 33 in Los Angeles when everything changed. The cast and crew of The Carol Burnett Show were in the middle of rehearsing an episode with guest singer Petula Clark, who had just flown in from London. Spirits were supposed to be high, After all, the show was at the top of its game and everyone knew it. The stage lights were glowing, the cameras were ready, and Carol Burnett was seated quietly in the audience area, watching the rehearsal unfold. But underneath the usual buzz of laughter and chatter, there was tension. People could sense it. Something about Harvey Korman's mood felt off that day. Harvey had always been passionate, even demanding about his performances. He wanted every line, every gesture, and every moment to be perfect. Normally, that energy pushed the team to do their best, but that afternoon his patience seemed thin. The crew was adjusting the lighting for a sketch when a small mistake happened. A spotlight missed its mark, leaving half of Harvey's face in shadow. It was a small issue, one that could easily be fixed in seconds, but for reasons no one expected, it set him off completely. Without warning, Harvey threw his script onto the floor and shouted across the stage, "After all these years, can't anyone get it right?" His voice echoed through the studio. Everyone froze. Petula Clark stood quietly at the edge of the set, unsure what to do. The lighting crew stopped moving. Director Dave Powers tried to calm him, saying they could fix it right away, but Harvey wasn't listening. He kept shouting, his frustration pouring out. Then he said the words that hit everyone the hardest, "Even Carol didn't notice." That comment changed the air in the room. For Carol Burnett, known for her kindness, patience, and respect for everyone she worked with, it was more than just a rude remark. It felt like a personal attack in front of her entire team. For a moment, no one knew what she would do. She didn't raise her voice. She didn't argue. Instead, she stood up slowly from her seat in the audience and walked toward the stage. The entire studio went silent as her heels clicked on the floor. When she reached him, she looked directly at Harvey and spoke in a calm, clear voice. "Harvey, I've had enough. If you can't respect everyone here, you don't need to be here." Her words were steady and firm. Everyone held their breath. The silence that followed was so intense that one crew member later said you could hear a microphone drop. Harvey stood there for a moment, staring at her, realizing what had just happened. Then, without saying a word, he turned and walked off the set. No one followed him. Carol quietly returned to her seat, and the rehearsal ended early. After the outburst, Carol stayed behind in the empty studio. One of the cameramen remembered seeing her sitting alone for nearly half an hour, staring at the chair where Harvey had been. She didn't cry, but she looked deeply sad. She finally said softly, "I didn't want it to end this way, but he went too far." By that evening, word had already spread through CBS. The next morning, the Los Angeles Herald-Examiner ran the headline, "Harvey Korman leaves the Carol Burnett Show during rehearsal." The network gave no official comment, but Variety and other Hollywood outlets quickly filled in the blanks. Rumors spread that Carol had finally lost patience after months of tension. Some insiders claimed Harvey had been difficult for weeks. Others defended him, saying the pressure of success had gotten to him. Either way, the story became one of Hollywood's biggest behind-the-scenes scandals of the year. For 3 days, Harvey stayed silent. Carol kept filming and didn't mention his name once. Her professionalism never wavered, but people close to her said she seemed quieter, more withdrawn. Then, on the 4th day, CBS received a phone call. It was Harvey. He asked to speak to Carol directly. When she picked up, his voice was shaky. "I was wrong," he said. "I want to come back." The next morning, he showed up at the studio's team meeting. Everyone watched as he apologized to the crew and then turned to Carol. "I forgot why I started," he said quietly. Carol smiled, stepped forward, and hugged him. The room erupted in applause, but even then, those who were there could feel that something between them had changed. But Carol's challenges didn't end there. Another storm was quietly forming, this time much closer to home. Joe Hamilton. When Carol Burnett first met Joe Hamilton in the early 1960s, she was a rising star with a natural gift for comedy, and he was a respected television producer with years of experience behind him. Their paths crossed while working on The Garry Moore Show, a popular variety series where Carol was a regular performer. Joe had a calm confidence about him, the kind that came from knowing the ins and outs of television. Carol later said that the first time he looked at her, she felt seen in a way that mattered. That sense of mutual respect and admiration quickly turned into something more. By 1963, the two were married in a small California ceremony surrounded by close friends and colleagues. For a while, their lives felt perfectly aligned. They were partners both at home and in the studio, two people who shared the same passion for television and creativity. Carol brought warmth, emotion, and humor to everything she touched, while Joe handled the technical and production side of things. When the Carol Burnett Show began in 1967, their partnership seemed unstoppable. Joe became the show's executive producer, managing the schedules, the budgets, and the behind-the-scenes details that made the series run smoothly. Carol trusted him completely. He believed in her talent and often pushed her to take risks, reminding her that audiences loved her for being genuine. By the mid-1970s, those who worked on the show began to notice a change. Joe had become more controlling, insisting that every creative decision go through him first. He began approving guest lists, reviewing scripts, and even cutting emotional scenes that Carol believed were essential to the show's tone. His approach was businesslike and focused on efficiency, while Carol wanted to protect the heart and humanity that made her audience feel connected. She once told him during a production meeting, "People don't just want jokes, they want to feel something too." But Joe disagreed. He believed sentiment slowed things down. These creative differences slowly became personal ones. Joe's authority on the set sometimes clashed with Carol's natural leadership as the face of the show. Their conversations became shorter, their disagreements more frequent. For the first time, Carol began to feel like a guest on her own program. Friends like costume designer Bob Mackie noticed how tense things had become, but Carol never complained publicly. She stayed professional and focused on the work, believing that the show's success would somehow bring them back together. Then came the whispers, rumors that Joe was spending more time than usual with a young CBS editor. People had seen them having lunch together near the studio or working late in editing suites long after filming had ended. At first, Carol refused to believe it. She told herself that Joe was simply dedicated to his job, but the rumors grew louder. Close friend and co-star Vicki Lawrence later shared that Carol broke down after overhearing colleagues gossip about Joe's too-friendly relationship. Still, Carol didn't confront him. She carried the pain quietly, the same way she handled everything with grace. The final blow came a few years later, and it had nothing to do with gossip. While reviewing business documents in 1982, Carol's lawyer discovered that Joe had quietly created a new company called Hamilton Productions. He had registered several projects under his own name, projects that had grown directly out of the Carol Burnett Show, including Mama's Family, a spin-off based on one of Carol's most beloved sketches. Carol was listed nowhere in the paperwork. The revelation was devastating. To her, it wasn't just a business move, it was a betrayal of everything they had built together. When she confronted him in their CBS office, the conversation was brief but unforgettable. According to the biography Laughing Till It Hurts, Carol asked, "Do you think it's fair to turn what we built together into something just yours?" Joe didn't flinch. He simply said, "It's business, Carol, not emotion." That single sentence ended both their marriage and their working relationship. In March 1983, Carol filed for divorce in Los Angeles County Court. The news hit the entertainment world like a shockwave. The Los Angeles Times headline read, "Carol Burnett and Joe Hamilton split," and for months, reporters followed every step of the proceedings. The separation turned into one of Hollywood's most complicated divorce battles. Joe demanded full production rights and a large share of profits from the Carol Burnett Show and its related projects. Carol, determined but composed, fought to keep the name and half of the show's earnings. After the divorce, Carol focused on rebuilding her life. She stopped working on Joe's productions and distanced herself from the projects he controlled. Though his later shows never reached the same success, she never spoke ill of him. When Joe passed away from heart disease in 1991, Carol didn't attend the funeral. Instead, she sent white flowers with a short note that said, "I wish you peace, Joe. As for me, I'll keep going." It was quiet, graceful, and full of unspoken emotion, just like her. But before she could find her balance again, another Hollywood storm was waiting, this time involving one of its most famous movie legends, Marlon Brando. It was a quiet summer night in July 1972 when Carol Burnett was woken up by the sound of her house phone ringing. It was around 3 o'clock in the morning, and the hills of Los Angeles were completely still. Her housekeeper, thinking it might be an emergency from the studio, quickly brought her the phone. Groggy and half asleep, Carol answered, expecting to hear a producer or assistant's voice. Instead, she heard a deep, familiar one say, "Carol, it's Marlon Brando." At first, she thought it was a prank. After all, Brando was one of the biggest stars in the world at the time. The Godfather had just made him Hollywood's most admired and most unpredictable actor. The idea that he'd be calling her in the middle of the night seemed ridiculous. But then he mentioned seeing a rerun of the Carol Burnett Show earlier that evening and started talking about how much he admired her work. That's when she realized it really was him. The conversation started politely enough. Brando complimented her timing, her humor, and how she brought heart into every performance. He said that television needed more women like you. Carol, ever gracious, thanked him and assumed the call would end there. But it didn't. Brando kept talking, his tone getting more personal as the minutes passed. He shifted from talking about comedy to sharing his opinions about fame, acting, and how lonely the entertainment world could feel. His voice, slow and smooth, filled the quiet room as he drifted from one subject to another. Then his words began to cross a line. What had started as admiration began to sound more like flirtation. Brando started making comments about her voice and how he couldn't stop thinking about her smile on television. Carol grew increasingly uncomfortable. She was polite but cautious, trying to steer the conversation back to work. When it became clear that he wasn't taking the hint, she decided to end it firmly. In her calm but steady way, she said, "Mr. Brando, I appreciate your kind words, but it's very late, and I have an early call tomorrow." Without waiting for a response, she wished him good night and hung up. She assumed that was the end of it. CBS issued a short statement calling it a personal call, but that did little to stop the rumors. For Carol, the experience was humiliating. She had worked for years to build a reputation as a professional woman in comedy, a space still dominated by men, and now she was being painted as the subject of celebrity gossip. She feared that people would twist the story into something it wasn't. According to her close friend and co-star Vicki Lawrence, Carol was furious and hurt. Over lunch days later, she told her friend, "He crossed the line. I can't believe someone like Marlon Brando thinks a late-night call is acceptable." From that point on, she made sure never to be in the same room as Brando again. At events and award shows, her PR team was instructed to avoid any venue or table where he might appear. In her scheduling notes, there was even a quiet instruction that read, "Do not attend events with Brando present." It wasn't public knowledge, but several CBS insiders later confirmed that Carol followed that boundary for years. But Carol's patience would be tested again soon. This time not by a late-night phone call, but by a public insult from one of Hollywood's most respected stars, Cary Grant. The year was 1968, and Hollywood was at its most glamorous. The Beverly Hilton Hotel was packed with stars for the annual Hollywood Foreign Press Association Gala, a night of flashing cameras, champagne toasts, and elegant gowns. It was one of those evenings where every table shimmered with diamonds and fame. Among the guests that night were Lucille Ball, Gregory Peck, Elizabeth Taylor, and Cary Grant, the man many considered the very definition of charm and sophistication. Carol Burnett, by then one of television's brightest stars, arrived in a stunning red gown designed by Bob Mackie. She was glowing. The Carol Burnett Show had just become one of CBS's biggest hits, and audiences across America adored her for her mix of humor, humility, and heart. The event was meant to celebrate success and unity within the industry. Cary Grant was being honored with a Lifetime Achievement Award, a recognition of his long and distinguished career. After the ceremony, Carol made her way over to his table to congratulate him. It was a natural gesture. She admired his work and wanted to pay her respects. Holding her glass of champagne, she smiled warmly and said hello. At first, the conversation seemed polite. Then, in a moment that no one present would ever forget, Grant's tone changed. According to those nearby, a director seated at the table tried to lighten the mood by asking if Grant had seen the Carol Burnett Show. Before Carol could respond, Grant smirked and said, "Oh, that show, the one where she waves her arms, makes faces, and overacts. I don't understand why people enjoy that sort of thing." His words landed like a sudden chill across the table. A few guests gave awkward laughs, unsure how to react, while others fell silent. Carol, still smiling but clearly caught off guard, paused for a moment. Then, without missing a beat, she replied calmly, "Maybe people prefer laughing with real folks rather than with perfection." Her response was direct yet perfectly composed. She didn't raise her voice, didn't try to match his arrogance, and simply spoke her truth. The table went silent. Grant, known for his polished confidence, had nothing to say. Carol gave a polite nod and walked away. Witnesses later said the moment was uncomfortable but unforgettable. In a room full of powerful men, Carol had stood her ground with quiet grace. The next morning, a small entertainment brief appeared in the Los Angeles Times under the title "Cary Grant and Carol Burnett, a frosty encounter at the Beverly Hilton." The article didn't include many details, but it was enough to stir curiosity. Within days, the story was being whispered all over Hollywood. Some tried to defend Grant, saying he was only joking, but most readers, and especially women, took Carol's side. Letters poured into CBS praising her dignity and humor. The network even issued a brief statement that subtly supported her. It read, "Carol Burnett represents humor that is humane and intelligent, laughter born from empathy, not foolishness." It didn't mention Grant by name, but everyone understood the message. Cary Grant didn't help his case. In later interviews, when asked about American television comedy, he made several remarks that sounded dismissive. In one conversation with Variety journalist Art Silverman, he said, "I prefer a more refined humor, something closer to the European style. Television these days tries too hard to be funny." He didn't name anyone, but it was clear who he meant. To many, it came across as elitist and outdated. Carol, meanwhile, stayed completely silent. She never commented publicly about the exchange. Instead, she let her work speak for her. 2 years later, Paramount Pictures offered Carol a role in a new musical film alongside Cary Grant. It would have been a huge opportunity, a meeting of television and film legends. But Carol quietly turned it down. When a friend asked why, she reportedly said, "I won't work with someone who looks down on women's laughter." That one sentence said everything. She didn't hold a grudge, but she refused to compromise her principles. But even as she handled her critics with grace, another challenge was waiting, one that would cut deeper than words and reveal Hollywood's gender divide in a very public way. Lorne Michaels. By the mid-1970s, television comedy was changing fast. The Carol Burnett Show was still a top-rated success, but a new kind of humor was starting to take over. In 1975, NBC premiered a bold live show called Saturday Night Live, led by a young Canadian producer named Lorne Michaels. While Carol Burnett represented warmth, humanity, and family-friendly laughter, Michaels was building something completely different, raw, rebellious, and filled with political satire. It was the comedy of a new generation, and almost overnight, SNL became the cultural center of late-night television. At first, there was curiosity about how these two worlds might meet. Carol Burnett was still a household name, beloved by millions, and respected even by those who worked in edgier circles. Many critics thought it would make perfect sense for her to host Saturday Night Live. She had live performance experience, comedic timing, and decades of success behind her. In fact, in the show's early days, several journalists suggested that having Burnett as a guest host would be a symbolic bridge between television's golden age and its new wave of comedy. But that never happened. Behind the scenes, according to several accounts, Lorne Michaels didn't see her as a fit. In production discussions for SNL's second season in 1976, her name reportedly came up, but Michaels allegedly dismissed the idea, saying she doesn't fit the spirit of the show. The comment wasn't printed at the time, but it would later be recalled by staffers who worked on the early seasons. To Michaels, SNL was meant to be young, political, and slightly chaotic. Carol, with her polished variety style and emotional sketches, represented what he viewed as old television. This unspoken divide between the two forms of comedy soon became clear to the public. The Carol Burnett Show ended in 1978, just as SNL was reaching its creative peak. In many ways, one era replaced another. But as years passed, fans began to notice something odd. Despite being one of the most accomplished comedians in television history, Carol Burnett had never once hosted Saturday Night Live. The question resurfaced in 1981 when the Washington Post ran an article by journalist Tom Shales mentioning that Burnett had shown interest in hosting the show several times but never received a response. The piece caused a small uproar. NBC's public statement didn't help much. It read, "Guest hosts are chosen based on each season's content and tone." It was vague and dismissive, and many people saw it as an excuse. The idea that Carol Burnett, a television pioneer who paved the way for female comedians, had never been invited struck many as unfair. Then came the famous 1991 Television Academy event in Los Angeles, where both Burnett and Michaels were scheduled to speak. Reporters later described what happened as one of the most awkward moments in industry history. Carol received a long-standing ovation when she walked on stage. Minutes later, when Lorne Michaels took the microphone, Carol stayed seated, smiling politely but not clapping. Cameras caught her expression, calm, polite, and icy. The clip aired on Entertainment Tonight and was quickly dubbed the coldest look in Hollywood. For many fans, it was proof that even though she never said a harsh word, she hadn't forgotten the slight. Decades passed, and the topic faded from conversation until 2023, when NBC aired Carol Burnett, 90 Years of Laughter plus Love, a televised celebration of her life and career. During a post-show interview with The Hollywood Reporter, a journalist asked if she regretted never hosting Saturday Night Live. Carol, now 90 years old but still as sharp as ever, smiled and replied, "I guess they didn't need me, but I didn't need them either." The line spread online within hours. Fans saw it as the perfect, classy comeback after nearly 50 years of silence. Even after so many years, her gentle words carried weight. By refusing to let bitterness define her story, she reminded everyone that dignity can be louder than any public feud. If you enjoyed this deep dive into Hollywood's untold stories, make sure to like, subscribe, and hit the notification bell so you don't miss the next one.